All right, we're gonna have an opportunity here just to look at the rubric and hopefully something that we can look back at because, of course, we remember this is the most important document really that NESA shares with us. This is where the HSC examiners will come back to sort of formulate their questions in the HSC. So it's very important that we understand this. Today we'll look at it and we'll get an understanding of what it says at the start, and we'll need to revisit it because obviously as we study text, it will broaden our understanding of what is in the rubric. So we start off with text and human experiences, and the first thing that I want to mention is that human experiences sort of build the idea of the human construct or the human condition. And essentially, those two words or two terms are things that we can use to broaden experiences because it then essentially is what makes us human, okay? And it's what makes us behave in a certain manner. And there's a lot of psychology in that, all right? So, what we can do is we can study a little bit of psychology around the human construct and the human condition and how human experiences add to that. And that'll give us some sophistication in our writing. So that's something we're going to do during the term to broaden our understanding of what the human construct or the human condition is. We then go into the actual rubric itself, and we see the first term that we want to pull out is individual and collective. So we get the idea that some experiences are very personal and very individual. And when we reflect on those, like by ourselves, that they can really have a strong impact on our lives and indicate who we are as people. All right, they can really sort of illuminate who we are. But equally, when we think about collective experiences and shared experiences, they have the same ability to impact on us in a really broad and really insightful manner for us to learn. The thing with collective human experiences is that even though I might be sitting directly beside someone experiencing that, our perspectives will, vary what that experience means to us as individuals. So even in the collective human experience, it will come back to an individual perspective, and that's what really shapes us. It's our reflection on it, and we can see in the second sort of point that we're going to draw out is that the text represent human qualities and emotions associated with that. And that's where we get that sort of individualism, because no matter what we experience, it's the qualities that we see in it and the emotions that it evokes in us. So I've written there that that's essentially it's the quality and emotion that reveals who we are. And we talked a little bit about the idea that maybe sometimes the traumatic experiences are the ones that illuminate us and allow us to understand more because we feel them really deeply and we hold on to them. So they essentially have a bigger impact on shaping us and indicating who we are. The next point that we want to look at is the way language is used to shape these representations. And we know that we're going to do this all the time. And essentially, this gets back to composition and technique and a word that I don't have here, intent. So the composer intends to represent a certain idea, and they do that in a certain manner because they want us to have a certain reflection or a certain for it to have a certain impact on us. So in some ways, and we'll get down a little bit lower, and you'll notice in the red I've put a lot of the sort of more English terms. When we're invited as a responder to see the world, we're invited because of the craft and the artistry of the composer that they can manipulate and put us and place us in a certain space for us to reflect in a certain way. Now, obviously, again, our perspective will be different depending on who we are, but there's certainly some art and craft in what the composers do to put us in that. And language and technique and composition, that's generally the way that, or they're the tools that the composers use to create that. The next one's really interesting, and it's going to be really like overt for us in 1984, is that we're looking at the anomalies, the paradoxes, and the inconsistencies in human behavior. So these three words seem like, and like I'll put there that create the idea of incongruity and it's this idea of complexity. But when we look at it, it makes a perfect sense for human experiences to have anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies because again, we will see things differently. So that would obviously create an inconsistency. sometimes the complexity of life is that the good and the bad can be equally as effective or equally as impactful on our lives. And sometimes the worst things actually create the greatest growth. So we can see that these paradoxes exist, within our own lives. And then when we apply it to 1984, we think about, I made the point of freedom is slavery, or sorry, slavery is freedom. And then at one point when O'Brien is interrogating Winston, he actually switches around. He says slavery is freedom. So to not have to make a choice is free. Now, initially, when you say slavery is freedom, you say that's actually offensive. But then when you look at it more deeply, and that's what a paradox is, that's a contradiction. We don't agree with it. But then when you think, you know what, not to make choice, not to have to decide what to do, there is a freedom in that, to be totally controlled by a totalitarian state. There is something about that is freeing, and that's where the paradox does create some idea that it makes sense. And that's essentially what a paradox is. So the contradiction exists, but there is some truth in that contradiction. So we'll find, I think, a lot of those in 1984, but we'll find, I think, them in general, because what motivates my human behavior and what motivates someone else's human behavior can be really differing. So we should find those anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies. And like we said, we'll comment on how that creates incongruity. And incongruity in itself challenges us. Okay, so when we get to this next idea of inviting the responder, it's those things that really invite us to come into a text and make us really, it resonates with us. So when we're really thinking about the end of Big Brother, we don't put the book down, of 1984, when he says, I love Big Brother, we don't put it down and go, I'm okay with that. We put it down and we actually really critically think, what is happening there? Why has Orwell placed me in this position? Why is he wanting me to, what does he want me to think? What does he want me to do with that? And that's effective narrative, all right? So Orwell's really challenged us and put us in an uncomfortable position, but in that uncomfortable position, we can really grow. Then we've got this next idea in the blue here, the role of storytelling. And Lily, that's for you, just so that you've got a lot of color. The role of storytelling throughout time, we get the idea that there's a value in literature, that literature can really help us understand and navigate the world that we're in. And we see there that it reflects particular lives and cultures. So 1984, I guess, is a culture, because it's a dystopian text, it's a futuristic text. So the culture that it's creating is one we don't really understand, but it's a prediction. And within that prediction, it becomes a warning. All right, that is the world that could be created if you don't stand up for your own individual rights and ensure that it doesn't occur. So it creates a culture that we're not familiar with. But the reflection of particular lives, we can really connect with someone like Winston or someone like Julia, even O'Brien, because they represent our lives and our understanding of our own lives. So when we look at this sort of idea in the rubric, the idea of those particular lives, I feel like Winston is a fairly easy person. Like the loneliness, the isolation, then the connection, we can really get that, okay, because his particular life is probably not that different to the experience that we have. We understand those human emotions, okay, that go with the experiences that he's having. As we go down in that sort of third paragraph, it's really about some of the prescriptions or some of the details that we need to adhere to in this module, or in the common module here. We've got to do one prescribed text. Our prescribed text will be 1984 by George Orwell. Then a little bit below, we've got this one related text. So you've got to choose a text that you want to study, that has, obviously something to do with human experiences and that you can connect with 1984. And the only time you need to use that related text is in the first assessment task, which you'll be receiving shortly. And essentially you'll be having to combine that with 1984 to write a response. Okay, so in the HSC itself, you will not be required to use that one related text. The other thing I've highlighted in that paragraph is around some of the aspects of a text that we need to be aware of. So the context of a text. So we're going to obviously, learn about George Orwell, learn about where he wrote the text, what were the influences on his text at the time. So when he's writing it, what's happening in the world, how does that influence his ideas? What's his purpose? So what's he trying to achieve through that? What structure does he choose to use, and what effect does that have? Then obviously we've got the stylistic and grammatical features, which would be more our sort of literary techniques. And how do all of these combine to shape our understanding of his text? So that's a good little list for us to sort of almost tick off in our mind when we're analysing 1984. Have we done those things? And it reminds us, so a lot of the stuff that I've highlighted in red or pink there essentially reminds us of what we need to do in a question or in a response, even if it doesn't ask. Okay, so we've got to put that in to ensure that our response is of the highest quality. In the last paragraph in the rubric, they sort of again talk a little bit about some aspects that we need to be aware of, and one there is that that we're going to analyze the way that people communicate using figurative language, but we're also going to use that to draw out how people use figurative language when we need to write imaginatively, and that will come in module C. Then we see that we're also going to use evaluative language, to make judgments about text, and that's more for our analytical writing. All right, and we see the idea that we're not just writing responses of a nature where we just say this is sort of what my teacher told me. We're making our own evaluations, our own judgments about the text, and we're bringing in, and you can see it in the green there, we're bringing in our personal voice and our personal views around the text that we're studying. That that one in green there about bringing your personal voice into your writing is we've already discussed how big a marker that is of a student who can achieve a band 6, and to be honest, of a student who really has studied their English with a critical mind. Now, there's a lot of things in English that are of value, but that idea of being critical and having your own personal perspective on a text, that is crucial, because realistically, when you leave school, that might be the number one thing that you've gotten out of English in terms of being able to be critical and to be able to look at things from your own perspective and to bring in your own opinions and your own judgments and to justify them. So that's a real skill in a lot of jobs and in a lot of areas. So we want to really hone that in, because we know that that's something of real value. And the other element is that the HSC examiners are now trying to ask quite specific questions that demand of you critical thinking and judgment. So we want to really harness that, because we know that that's going to be an expectation in the questions that we're answering. So guys, when you get an idea of this rubric, hopefully you should analyze it yourself. Obviously, you could just copy mine, but I want you to put it in your own language. And I've hopefully said something or used a word that is better than what I've written down, that you can use, and that can start to become part of that word bank that you're going to use for human experiences, and starting to build your vocabulary that you can use in your responses. So like I said, at any point where you think, am I getting too far away from the rubric, come back, listen to this video, just focus in terms of what the elements of this rubric are, because we remind ourselves that the question essentially comes from here. Thanks very much, guys.